Good morning, it's today again. Welcome back to Joseph's Reserves. I'm Joseph, and I store 20% of my income in the form of rare coins and precious metals. Before we get into today's video, I do have a confession to make. I was looking back over my spreadsheet that I'm working on, counting all of my silver that has been the subject of my last few videos. I started with American Silver Eagles, then went to non-American coins, and just recently counted up my generic silver. And I made a mistake. I looked at a number that added the total of all of my coins and thought that that number was just the non-American coins. So the 195.2 ounces is actually all of my coins, including the American Silver Eagles and non-American coins. So that with 102.5 ounces from my generic video actually brings my total to 297.7 ounces so far. But today we're going to continue with the count, starting the journey of counting the 90% silver that I have. Today we're just going to start with dimes because that is already quite a large task. So without delaying it any further, let's go ahead and get into the video. Alright, before we start, I gotta shout out Fateful Shirt again. And actually, I found out his name is actually not Fateful Shirt, it's Fateful SRT. So find Fateful SRT down in the comments. Let him know that you like that he's being the first comment consistently, and thank him on my behalf for his support for this channel. Let's figure out where to start on this count. I think where I'm going to start is actually just showing you all of the books that I have. These are what are called date runs or just date albums. Here I'm going to start with the Mercury dimes, and I'm not going to count them all for you right here. I'll just go ahead and show you the holes that I have filled, and then at the end I'll include all the numbers in my total. So these are my Mercury dimes. I probably should have started with the other book, but we'll go ahead and go on to the Barber dimes next. That's right here. So as you can see, I have a lot more work to do on these Barber dimes, as well as getting better condition coins. But Barber dimes are pretty scarce, so they're kind of hard to find in really good condition. These ones were also circulated the most before silver was pulled out, so they are very, very worn. And finally, we have the Roosevelt dimes. This collection I actually have completed, so I'm pretty proud of this, but it is time to start upgrading some. I have some toned ones, some somewhat worn ones, but I do actually have a lot of uncirculated examples here, so I'm pretty happy with it. And then, of course, we do have the typesets. Before I get too far away from these typesets, a typeset is actually when you collect one of each design in each denomination. So you'll pick dimes, quarters, half dollars. There's even a half dime, pennies, nickels. You'll get one of each design. So here you see I have a Barber dime, a Mercury dime, and a Roosevelt. And even going back to the seated Liberty designs, this is a full typeset of the smaller denominations, so it only goes up to the dimes for this album specifically. And then this one here is a all denomination typeset going all the way back to the 1900s. So again, I have a Barber dime, Mercury, and Roosevelt. This is definitely a great way to start getting into collecting or start doing date runs. Starting a typeset is a great way to figure out what type of series you might like or what type of denominations might be best for you to collect. I love that sound of silver. Looking at this pile, you might already be asking, why stack dimes? Why even stack 90% silver at all? And, well, the majority of the answer is diversity and divisibility. 90% silver allows you to have fractional silver without the high premium of these smaller coins. While these ones are not actually marked as silver or with the exact amount like pure bullion fractional coins are, these ones are set to a known standard and will always be exactly the same. That is, as far back as when the Coinage Act deemed them to be at a specific standard. The last Coinage Act to determine the weight of a dollar defined it as 25 grams of 90% silver. So that means that a dollar of face value, as long as it's not too worn, will contain 25 grams of 90% silver or 22.2 grams of pure silver. I hope you heard the clause there, as long as it's not too worn. So what do we do about worn coins? Well, there's actually a rule of thumb, kind of an industry standard that everyone uses. They say that $1.40 in face value, which is 14 dimes, is equivalent to 1 troy ounce of silver. But if we run through the math, $1.40 or 14 dimes would actually get you 35 grams of 90% silver, which comes out to 31.5 grams. And as any stacker would know, 31.103 grams is what is in a troy ounce. And that is where the wear comes in. If your coins are worn down to a very specific amount, they will actually end up being exactly a troy ounce. So how much wear is that? Don't worry, I've already done the math for you. It would actually make it so that each dollar in face value would have to have 24.68 grams of 90% silver. That's actually a much easier number to remember than you think. It's just 2468. So if you're making a dollar, it's 24.68 grams, or if you're measuring 1 dime, that is 2.468 grams. All right, so that was just a whole lot of numbers, but here's what you need to know. Industry standard says that $1.40 of face value is equivalent to 1 troy ounce. So 1 dime is a 14th of an ounce. Now, when buying and transacting with these 90% silver coins, there are two schools of thought. Some coin shops price them by the face value. They say you're buying $1 face value for this much, and that's what it is. They get that number by just using the $1.40 face value to the 1 ounce price. Other coin shops will actually weigh all of the coins, calculate the silver that is within the entire stack that you're wanting to purchase, and charge you for only that amount of silver. Each have their benefits. If you're buying non-worn coins, then you'll definitely want to be buying them by the face value, because you might be buying an entire lot of 2.5 gram dimes that would actually be cheaper if you buy them in the face value. However, if you're buying something older like mercury dimes, barber dimes, then weighing them is actually going to be your best bet, because those will be significantly worn below that 2.468 gram mark, and you'll be paying more money than the actual silver that you're going to be taking home. A lot of people stay away from very worn coins because of this exact reason. They call it a slick tax. Slick is just what people call coins when they're extremely worn. So all of that to say, does the weight actually matter? Well, the weight does matter if you're buying it for the weight. Or it also matters if you're using this set ratio of $1.40 face value to 1 ounce. If you're locked in on that rate, all your coins should be 2.468 grams. At least that's what you're going to be paying for. I usually try to pay for all of my 90% by weight, so that I'm only paying for the silver that I'm actually taking home. Now, what about the other side? What if I'm actually able to spend this? Are people going to really care about the design, or are they going to care about how much this coin is worn? Well, actually, yes, a lot of people will. So most people stack exclusively the mercury dimes, and that's because no matter what, that design is silver. A lot of people like to stack the Roosevelt dimes because even though the Roosevelt dimes do come in a clad format, meaning the modern day coinage that is copper nickel plating over a copper coin, people say that even though you will have to check the dates or the rims on these Roosevelt dimes, they're a much better medium because they are going to be less worn than the Mercury dimes. The truth is, I've found significant amount of Mercury dimes that are over that 2.468 mark, and actually a lot of Roosevelt dimes that are under that mark. So I think if you're going to be upset about how much wear is on your coin, you might as well just weigh each one and just pick the ones that are not worn. However, there is another school of thought. If you're going to be spending these at a set rate based on the face value, let's say if you're trading with someone and they just say 30 cents face value is this price for whatever good or service you're going to be paying for, you could use very slick Mercury dimes and it would be 30 cents. Now, if they say they want 7.5 grams of 90% silver, then they are definitely going to be weighing your coins, and they're probably going to ask for you to compensate with that wear by paying extra silver. All of this to say, if you're paying it by the face value or the weight, and you're spending it by the face value or the weight, does it really matter if this whole conversation is really about fractions of a gram? Well, right now, 1 gram of silver is almost $2. So, yes, I do think it matters. But really, what matters is your integrity. If you want to be the best you can, buy the best conditioned coins you can so that if someone's going to weigh it or if they just want the face value, just give them the nice coins. And if you only have slick coins, then you should be the bigger person and offer them an extra coin to make up that difference for how much wear has come from people already circulating those coins. We've got all these dimes stacked up here in stacks of 10. But actually, before I forget, I'm going to show you all this graded seated Liberty dime that I have from 1877. 1877 is an extremely common date, and very fine 30 is not a very, very high grade that would demand a whole lot extra. I think I paid somewhere in the realm of $60 for this coin, and I'm just excited to start my graded type set of dimes. So eventually I'll be upgrading to more rare and better conditions, but for now, this is what I have. Eventually I'll get a Barber dime to go with it, a Mercury dime, and a Roosevelt dime so that I could start working on this typeset in graded coins. I do have a few raw of these older dimes here, and this is where you're going to be able to see what I'm calling this slick tax or slick coins. But this is an example from 1889, and it's actually in very, very good condition. This is not one that would be purchased just by the weight alone. This is one that would actually have a lot more premium. And this series actually went all the way until 1891 before it was changed into the what's now called the Barber dime or Barber designs. All of the dime, quarters, and half dollars had these same designs. And then in 1916, we went to the Mercury dime. But this here is the designs that you could actually be stacking. The Barbers are going to have the most wear that you're going to be able to get in just a coin shop for its silver price. The seated Liberties are definitely going to have a higher premium. However, the minting standard of 25 grams to $1 started in 1873, so you could technically go all the way that far back and get the same size coin or the same amount of silver per coin. So here we actually have another full type set of all of the different designs that came out after 1873 that were 2.5 grams of silver, at least when they were originally minted. As you can see, this Barber dime is pretty worn. It's probably somewhere close to 2.2 grams. And that's where that actually becomes very important, the 2.468 grams that I've been talking about. So how much do we actually have here? Between all the stacks, all the books, and even my graded coin, I counted 579 coins. And if we take it by its face value, that each coin contains 1/14 of an ounce, that accounts for 41.537 ounces, which actually brings the running total to 339.239 ounces. And don't worry, I actually checked this time. So if you're interested in 90%, make sure you give this video a like, get in the comment section to start a conversation. But most of all, thank you so much for watching. And just remember, all the ounces add up. So no matter how small, even if it's just one dime, just keep stacking.